6.4 is the lesson. The Great Migration is the title. How did the flow of immigration after 1815 reinforce the British character of Canada? We'll learn all about that and more. So stick around and let's learn something. Like I said, it's lesson 6.4. How did the flow of immigration after 1815 reinforce the British character of Canada? In this point in our story of Canadian history, this is known as the Great Migration. The Great Migration to Canada. If you Google the Great Migration, you'll have all kinds of things that come up, but this one specifically is the Great Migration into Canada. And what the British wanted to do is, after the War of 1812, they started to open up the backwoods, and they wanted to bring in people to go and settle those areas. So they brought in the Irish, the Scots, the English, and the Welsh. They've got something in common. I wonder if you can think of what that might be. Anyways, they brought in those four groups as much as possible to open up those backwoods. And we saw 8,000 immigrants. That's a lot of people arrive between 1815 to 1850. This is known as the Great Migration. That's a lot of people. So why did they come? Why come to the colonies here in North America? Well, the jobs that were in England, they were very scarce. There wasn't a lot of jobs available for people anymore in England. The farmland that was once all over the place and prevalent in England was starting to be taken away as cities were expanding and getting bigger. The Irish famine, the potato famine, was happening in Ireland, so there was a lot of poverty and hunger that was happening there. Now that the wars have kind of subsided and ended, ocean travel was way safer than in the past. And the colonies, well, just like we saw in previous chapters, the colonies offered free land and new opportunities for people, which really, I mean, that's a big deal. You work your entire life for land and to have a good life and good opportunity. So why not come? So the journey from England to Canada took a number of weeks. And unfortunately, most of our immigrants that were coming over were poor immigrants, so they were crowded into the darkness below the deck. And because they were crowded 4 weeks below deck, this was a place where disease ran rampant. And oftentimes these ships that were coming over from England were called Coffin Ships because so many people died on the ships, and they would make their way to North America, and then people would have to remove these dead bodies. Once they did arrive, some immigrants, they decided to stay in the Maritimes. Others went to Quebec City and Montreal, and then the rest ended up going into Upper Canada. Now, I mentioned coffin ships. The ships were bad. The conditions were bad. And there's this year in 1847 that was nicknamed the Terrible Year. At this point in time in our story, we've got about 30,000 immigrants that are arriving annually, and two-thirds of those people, two-thirds of those immigrants are coming from Ireland. And the immigration in 1847 exploded, the Irish immigration exploded to 100,000 people because the potato crop in Ireland had failed. And now we've got poverty and we've got hunger. And the Irish, they needed to leave Ireland in order to survive. Typhus broke out on these ships, I got tongue-tied there, and thousands of people were dying en route. And thousands more, you can see here on the map, this is a Grosse Ile. There was a quarantine station there where people would have to quarantine because these ships had so much disease on there, and the doctors needed to give the people the okay to be able to leave these ships. And in 1847, in that terrible year, 5,424 people died in that year. That is a lot of people. That's very sad. But that did not stop people from coming over. They still made their way over, and they came over to North America, and they made their way to find a plot of land, a free plot of land that is given to them. But they were given a challenge. The challenge was to survive. Here's your challenge, kids. Here's this piece of land. Your job, live and survive. They had to clear the forest, which was an extremely difficult job to do because it was a very dense forest. The environment was very rugged. And, well, I mean, if you grow up in Canada, you're growing up in Canada, the environment here, the climate is very harsh. But this brought some new opportunities. So yes, we had our farmers and things like that, but we also had logging and mining industries pop up around as well. The previous slides we were talking about the 4 groups of people coming over, and those 4 groups were from the United Kingdom, from Great Britain, from England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland. And these groups of people, they were coming over, they were building their farm communities, and within those farm communities now towns are starting to develop where you have laborers, doctors, teachers, servants, loggers, miners, all working, but they all have something in common, the fact that they're British. And with them, they brought their customs, they brought their traditions, they brought any kind of entertainment that they would have. So music, stories, sports even, and of course, they would bring with them, obviously, the English language. So now we are becoming much more English, and that is going to be maybe down the road, as we'll see in future lessons, that could be a threat to the French language, which maybe we'll see, maybe a little bit of foreshadowing there. You can see this table here. You can see how the population is exploding between 1806 and 1851. Just look at Upper Canada. They started with 71,000, and then boom, 952,000 people in 1851. That is massive. That's a huge increase. All of them increased. Upper Canada, Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, they all exploded. Now, something else was coming to the British North America, to Upper Canada and Lower Canada, and that was slaves from the United States looking for freedom. And they took the Underground Railway up into Canada. Slavery did exist in New France for some time, and loyalists who were coming up from previous lessons, they were bringing slaves with them as well. But in 1792, Upper Canada, which is present-day Ontario, begins to phase out slavery. And all British colonies banned slavery in 1833. So now, if you were in the United States, you were seeing the colonies as a safe haven. And Canada was being billed as the land of promise. We need to get to Canada. We will be free once we get to Canada. And that's exactly what many slaves ended up doing. They went north via the Underground Railway. Now, this is not, this was a secret network that was used to hide slaves. And they would hide them in whatever they could hide them as they were making their way from the south to the north. And many of them did end up coming into Canada. Although you can see here on the map, some of them also went down into the Caribbean islands and places like that. But the majority of them ended up coming north, with many of them coming to Canada. And like I said, this secret network, they hid these slaves and these conductors and air quotations. They used the cover of darkness to move slaves from one station to the next station on this secret Underground Railway. But if you get caught helping a slave, you will go to jail. So it was very, very risky for these conductors even. But it was worth the risk. We are going to get people free. It is worth the risk, and many people were involved in the Underground Railway. 30,000 slaves used the Underground Railroad to reach their freedom. And it wasn't until 1865 that the United States ended slavery, and about half of those 30,000 slaves that used the Underground Railway went back to the United States. But the rest stayed in the colonies, where they built farms, they built schools, they built their own churches, and they created their own very unique communities that still exist today. All right, head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.